define the QDO development 2019. First of all, congratulations all team who proceed this far. On opening gun, we have YU1. On opening of portion, we have Bonoicot. On closing gun, we have Q-shoot. And on closing of portion, we have cutting philosophies. My name is Earl. I will be the local judge in this round. And judging with me is the panel who is? Okay. And before the round starts, I would like to remind the audience to keep silent during the speech and turn off your phone, or at least keep it in a silent mode. Okay, with that having said, I would like to call upon the Prime Minister to open the case in 7 minutes here.
Especially in Northeast Asian context, where there's an opposite narrative of independent women, where parents teach their daughters to become successful wives, to become the wives of CEO, rather than feeding the narrative to be a CEO themselves. We think that parents, therefore, influence their children, especially girls, to be not that sufficiently development themselves, but rather to be stuck in a gender role. Rather, we think that's an extremely toxic narrative, especially coming from a parent who has immense impact upon that child's life, right? Especially because this is active motion, we think we have to consider two important points in today's debate. Firstly, in terms of the role of parent, we think that the role of parent is not only to teach them the standard of success in a society like capitalism and whatnot, but rather to teach them the ways and direction of how to live. Meaning that they have the obligation and responsibility to show the path of what's best for their children, what's best, especially in the context of Northeast Asia, where women are continuously suffering from these gender norm and gender discrimination. Secondly, we also think that it is also in the interest of the parent to consider their personal values and background into their teaching of children. What do we mean by that? We think that these parents also suffer from the same gender discrimination, whatnot. Moms also suffer from their grandparents or parents telling them, oh, be a good wife or whatnot. We think that it's extremely irresponsible for these moms and these parents, given that they already suffer from that gender discrimination, to tell their children to go the same path. We think it's extremely toxic, extremely immoral for these parents, given that they know the knowledge. We think that's extremely harmful. So what is our background? What is our back model? We think that parents should rather tell their daughters to be, oh, it's okay not to be married, it's okay not to have a stable job, not to be a nurse or a teacher, as long as you are independent in terms of financial and emotional standards. We're not going to make them be, oh, you have to be submissive, delicate, or maybe quiet to be conformed to the norm of being a perfect wife. Rather, we want to give them the chance to self-actualize, rather independent from the gender role of being one's wife, being one's family's mom, right? So, two things I'm going to do in my speech. First, I'm going to identify the problem in the status quo. Secondly, I'm going to tell you how harmful this problem is. And thirdly, I'm going to tell you why our model, the value of independent women can solve this problem. The problem analysis is that from a young age, these girls are being forced to believe the narrative that you should be submissive, you should be delicate in order to be successful as a wife. Rather than these people also tell boys that, oh, you're okay to be individually successful as long as you have, you don't have, they're rather judged for the individual themselves. Two problems in this narrative. Firstly, given that this is normalized at such a young age, we believe it is extremely difficult for these girls, after they go to the society, to tackle the narrative. If one is told for 10 years from their parents, whom they most respect, tell you that you have to be a good wife, you have to receive external validation in order to succeed, we think that it's extremely hard for an individual to escape the narrative and have self-actualization. Secondly, the reason why this narrative is so harmful is that it creates a vicious cycle. Meaning that after these girls become wives, or maybe submissive people, rather than giving up their jobs or whatnot, these people would also be stuck in the cycle, therefore giving that same norm to their daughters or other people or whatnot. This would create a vicious cycle that would lead to a structural problem that is extremely hard to fix. Thirdly, we think that this is also harmful and that this incentivizes women to work harder, meaning that they don't work, like, because of the existing narrative that, oh, women may not be good at math or science, they don't have to go one step further to reach or like go beyond the discrimination, right? We think that now they would also think that, oh, it's okay to receive a B because I'm a woman. I don't think I have to receive an A, be a CDO to be successful. We think that they would be disincentivized to work harder because they don't really feel the drive to be successful as an individual. Rather, they will strive to be successful as someone's wife, as someone's mom, or whatnot. We think that this is extremely harmful, given that the status quo already has a harmful, toxic narrative that women should be submissive rather than self-actualized, right? So, why is our model going to help solve this problem? Our model, as I told you, is to feed into the narrative rather that, oh, you don't have to receive external validation to be happy. You don't have to receive external validation to be comprised or deemed as successful. Rather, we're going to tell them that it is okay to be not married. It is okay to not have a stable job. It is okay not to be someone's like wife or mom, as long as you have financial, emotional independency, right? So, also another important stakeholder to consider in today's debate are boys as well. Because we think that these boys, when they grow up and become like husbands or other men in our society, we don't think that discrimination happens because these people are inherently misogynistic or whatnot, because they see how their girls are treated, they see how their moms send their daughters to ballet class while sending them to learn math or science, giving them robots or whatnot. We think that this narrative also feeds into the stakeholder of boys by saying that, oh, maybe it is true that girls are actually submissive or whatnot. I've seen them for like 8 years of my elementary school training or whatnot, right? We think it's so irresponsible for these parents, especially, knowing that the end of the future, if they are internalizing this narrative, we think that it's extremely harmful for these kids. Therefore, we think they shouldn't actually do that.
So, when you feel content with being a good and faithful wife and a mom, why is that emotional dependence of this woman on their family necessarily something that is regrettable when everybody has different ways of pursuing self-actualization?
We think that that's exactly the point. Like, people should have diverse ways of having self-actualization or whatnot, but we think it's extremely harmful when the parents feed the narrative of that, oh, you should be a good wife, you should be a good daughter. That itself limits the boundary of self-actualization, right? If they teach them, oh, emotional independency and financial independency, and they still want to be married or whatnot, we think that that's personal choice. Rather, we think that it's harmful, especially in the status quo, when people are like heavily investing this narrative and making them internalize them. We think that it's extremely harmful in the point that it narrows their freedom of choice, it narrows their ways of self-actualization, right? We think that they should be able to decide how to self-actualize, with whom to self-actualize. We think that that should be their choice in and of itself. So at the end of the day, we think that the value of independent women would be impactful and that they would incentivize women to reach further, develop their own ways of self-actualization. Thirdly, cut the structural problem of vicious cycle where gender discrimination is prevalent, gender role is imposed, on and on. We think that this is how we can end the cycle of gender discrimination. That's why we're so proud to propose.
Thank you for your speech. Now I call upon the leader of opposition within 7 minutes here.
One extremely crucial clarification here in today's debate. The narrative that opening government is pushing for is not simply mitigating the currently oppressive narrative. They're rather going for another form of oppressive narrative that has different contents, and yet they're forcing their kids, saying, you need to be independent. You need to be disobeying the patriarchy. You need to marry a man who respects your entire agency. Another form of authoritative narrative that opening government is pushing for is not simply this naive narrative that mitigates the harms that exist in the current status quo. We need to get that point extremely clear, because it's not really about, hey, it's okay for you to not get married. It's saying you must not get married if these kind of conditions are not met. You should be independent because you're an independent woman. The very fact that you're pushing for certain ideals, that there is a certain ideal set in the veneer of normalcy of what independent women looks like, that's the oppressive narrative that opening government is pushing for. That is the very reason why we think it's a very counterproductive narrative that they're coming forward with, because they're not necessarily giving any choices or agency to their daughters at the end. They're coercing them into making a separate, different choice, which is also principally wrong to begin with. There's counterproductive to what they actually want to tackle to begin with. The stance of opening opposition in today's debate is very, very clear. We think we're entirely fine with daughters making the choice of either becoming dependent or independent woman out of their entire free choice. We're fine with that. You go ahead with your life. But what we're not okay with is that these parents are actively coercing certain ideals into the minds of these generations when their daughters are very susceptible and vulnerable to the narrative that the parents are giving to them, because they're the young beings. They don't really have the full information at their hand. The parent becomes a primary indicator of what's wrong and right when that's the status quo of these kids. The toxic narrative that parents are giving is detrimental to their full of agency choices. Because what we're going for is that there's no such thing that's ideal at the end, and the concept of ideal this independent woman portrays is flawed and problematic to begin with. Two substantial cases to supplement this explanation. One, we think the self-sufficiency and the norm of independent women in the current status quo is not really for all spectrum of women to begin with. We think it does not fulfill the intersectionality of women, not representing the proper general public of women's interests in general. Because look, these kind of self-actualization, which are higher level of self-satisfaction, only for those more privileged people who are most often winners of birth lottery. You should be young, you're mostly white, you're affluent, you're born in a very rich person, a very rich family, that you have no problem of eating food and enjoying whatever leisure you want to achieve. These people do not really need a validation from others because they themselves are so good, still good in their well-being, they're not really in these kind of needs. The more people that we have to more focus on are these people like poor black lesbian, saying these people who are suffering from different layers of discrimination to begin with. There are structural barriers for these people to achieve financial independence. There are more barriers for them to achieve emotional independence compared to all other intersectional women who are the winners of birth lottery at the end of the day. The impact of opening opposition is making here is very clear. We think opening government's narrative is creating a marginalizing norm for these international people who are at the bottom of the hierarchy, who have structural barriers that systematically disenfranchises them to begin with. We think that's very problematic and counterproductive to what they are saying. So what's the alternative coming from the opening opposition? We think it's more preferable to teach that nothing in this world is ideal to begin with, as opposed to opening government's oppressive norm of ideal of independent women. Because the ultimate aim is to achieve the true happiness and self-actualization, teaching them that you're the only one who can define how to be happy, what to be interpreted as happiness. Because we want to teach our kids that, look, you're the only person who can choose how to be happy, what to be happy about, and those standards can change according to how you live. That's the norm that we want to go for. The comparative here is that it's wrong for parents to dictate how to their daughters to self-actualize to begin with, because there are tangible harms existing over there. We think being free from achieving independence, or the norm, on the other hand, saying you need to achieve independence or you need to be independent, out of any kind of ideal set for them, we think now these daughters feel more legitimate, more happy, and more dignifying, according to whatever their choices may be, because there are no restriction as to what is right, what is wrong. We think that's the world that we want to pursue at the end of the day, because otherwise, another form of oppressive norm and narrative is created regardless of the good faith that opening government might be having. The second analysis is this. We think the norm of ideal independent woman is systematically impossible to begin with. Because look, we don't necessarily think self-actualization happens suddenly in the vacuum out of nowhere. Because look, we live in a world where we're suffering from constant competition. We live in a capitalist society that constantly requires you to be validated by other authorities. Because we are in a competition that's inevitable situation that we can simply ideally say, hey, you should be free from it. I don't think that's the case, right? In a world where validation is inevitable, and and validation is something that inevitably becomes a criteria of your own, when they say, hey, look, you can be free from all those kind of distortions, you're distorting the reality of how it's properly represented. 6, go.
Even if these parents teach them, it's not going to be a primary indicator because they're going to be continuously interacting with the society. If you don't teach anything, then you're just going to be absorbing the discriminatory narrative in society, right?
No, look. The reason why parents are primary indicators, and the reason why we call parents and family as a primary educational institutions, is because these kids are more susceptible to parental influence than others. Because look, when babies see a very strange thing that they've seen for the first time, they turn their head to their parents to see how they're feeling about it, and that becomes a primary indication of how they want to react to those new things. We think ignoring these kind of primary features is wrong for them to simply argue on their case. We think when it's a primary susceptible indication that parents are giving what kind of narrative to their children, we think it's a primary indicative that we have to be extremely careful. Look, we think parents, as well as educating them properly, helping them climb up the social ladder, and not making sure they don't suffer the same thing, we need the parents to show them the proper representation of the what world looks like, and making sure that they are empowered enough to make sure they themselves choose what kind of way that they want to empower themselves, what are the criteria that they think that makes them happy. Regardless of the result, we're fine with it if it's an entirely free choice, but it shouldn't come from the parents who are also creating another oppressive norm. Extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you for your speech. Now I call upon Deputy Prime Minister, which is 7 minutes here.
Speaker, the worst poison is not the one that crushes you from the very beginning. It's the one that makes you think that you're in the right direction. It's the one that makes you think that you have only control over it. Understanding that coercion happens on both sides, we would much rather have coercion under the side that questions the authority, that questions the patriarchy, that makes you question the decisions that people make you live just because they want you to live a comfortable life, right? You think that when you are not happy, the society tells you that you should be happy because there are things that we validate in society. That's the harm that open government wants to prevent happening to daughters, happening to young girls, right? A couple of clarifications before we move on, because we're not really sure what the model is coming from open opposition, right? Because we don't think the model is going to be if you don't teach daughters how to become independent women, they're going to have this liberation, and they're going to have the freedom to become the kind of person they want. We think that it's ultimately going to lead to this idea. The society thinks that you as a wife or you as a submissive person is valuable, but my parents don't tell me that that is wrong, right? We think it's going to further lead to this idea or stigmatization of these women that we don't want happening in society, right? But second, we think that in cases where I don't really understand how the case of intersectionality is ultimately beneficial towards opening opposition. Because under the cases of black lesbian women, we think it's much more difficult to achieve external validation because not only do you have to go through the misogynistic standards that society has, you also have to go through things like racism, you also have to go through things like transphobia or whatnot, or homophobia, right? We think that under that case, we would much prefer a world where we tell people the society standards are fucked up, and we would much prefer a world where you're able to live a happy life according to your values, and you're able to have the money where you're able to pursue the thing that you want, right? We think that also the cases where, I think the opposition does agree. The society is very screwed in terms of us having unrealistic standards for girls that we don't have for men. Unless opposition tells me how we're able to achieve a better world of equality, I think there are debate, right? I'm going to go on to 2 clarifications and expansions in my speech. Number 1, I want to talk about the opposition's case as to why being financially and emotionally independent, as the impulse side said, is important for the validation of these girls, or for the empowerment of these girls. And second, I'm going to talk about why, if you don't change the narrative happening in society, all the structural problems cannot be overcome even if policy changes, right? Number 1, the idea that opposition pushes for, because I think opposition is very, very irresponsible when it comes to the principle of what a parent should be, right? My prime minister already told you what kind of roles a parent has in a child's life, right? But if they're able to win the practical benefit, maybe they have the upper hand. We don't think that's the case because we don't think a daughter or a girl will be happy under the side of opening opposition. Why is that case? I'm going to talk about it at 2 levels of analysis. First being financially independent, second being emotionally independent, right? Let's talk about the case where under society achieve this happiness that they want from being a good mother or being a good wife, right? But we think that once you have the financial security of being able to opt into things that are able to make yourself actualize. Once I have a secure job, I'm also able to opt into things like my hobbies or being able to go rock climbing or whatnot. That's the kind of financial independence and that's the kind of motivation we want in these women. We don't think that the motivation that comes from you being a happy wife, you able to like burn off the money that comes from your husband is ever a validation we want for these women, right? But second, under the idea of emotional independence, right? Understand the self-actualization and the dignity that you receive from being a good wife is a narrative society wants you to believe, right? Society, being patriarchal, depends on women to be submissive because that's how men are ultimately able to be promoted. Men are ultimately able to earn more money, right? We think that that's the reason why society also silences women that have different ideas because we don't want you to go against the narrative and say that women should also be should also have these ideas, right? We think that another example that we can talk about is the idea of makeup, right? We tell girls that you have the freedom to put on makeup or not put on makeup, when actually society shames you for being lazy when you don't put on makeup. They ask you if you're sick if you don't have any like cosmetics on your face, right? That's the idea of neon, so the coercive choice that opening up should have to be defined under this case. Because we don't think it's the idea that society just gives you a free choice to opt in or opt out. You're demonized if you're opt out. You're not able to talk with or able to relate to other people, and that's the kind of narrative the parent has a responsibility to overcome, and it's changed at the end of the day, right? Ultimately, the case is this. If you're not happy and you're stuck in a toxic relationship in a family where you're not able to achieve financial and emotional independence, but society tells you that you are happy, we think it's time for us to question why that's the case. Why you aren't happy when society tells you you should be. And we think it's also the responsibility of the parents to tell the children that you ultimately have a freer choice. You ultimately have a responsibility to be active upon your own actions. Yes?
We're good with having a counter-narrative itself to currently oppressive things. But the problem is you need a fair burden to prove why it should be the act of parents to provide a counter-narrative when there are counter-narratives authorities in the status quo.
Yeah, let's moving on to the idea of structural problem, right? Because understand that this toxic narrative of us conforming to rules, of young women being pushed to be submissive and delicate and called aggressive or bitchy when they're able to call out or talk about their opinion, while young boys are praised for their confidence or their valor, is the status quo that we're living under, right? Why is it dangerous then that the parent is the one that is telling the doctor that you should reject the notion of independent woman or you should not conform to this idea, right? Because ultimately, parents are the ones that have gone through the same experiences. Parents know the mothers know the pain of not being able to go to college because your family is poor. Mothers know the pain of marrying someone for their social status and not for their money, right? But ultimately, the influence of the parents gets unobjected or unquestioned by these children because of the idea that my family loves me, because of the idea that my parents want what's best for me, right? Unless these narratives and stereotypes are questioned, we don't think policies, or we don't think the policies the government wants to push are ever going to change, right? That's the reason why even if you have policies that increase education for women or increase opportunities for jobs, we still see women opting out of jobs when they reach the age of 35 or having kids, right? Because of the idea that I should remain at home and be a successful wife and be a successful mother. So I think it's a toxic narrative that opening opposition has to defend. We're very proud to propose.
Thank you for your speech. Now I call upon Deputy Leader of Opposition, Senator Kyoyo.
polarization coming from the OG when they tell you that the way that this narrative is going to look like is something like, it's okay for you not to get married. It's okay for you to be independent. We don't think that's exactly the narrative that this emotion requires, right? We think that this narrative is necessarily going to look like something like, it's better that you don't get married. It's better that you're emotionally independent. It's better that you're financially independent from all these other things, right? That's the very nuance and the subtlety that exists with an ideal narrative. Is the idea that something is relatively better and comparatively more preferable over other narratives, right? So therefore, coming from the entire government bench, they cannot just sneakily run away from this idea that this narrative is going to be nuanced. This narrative is going to be, it's going to be very benevolent coming from these parents. Rather, the ideal narrative requires for you to defend a narrative that sounds more like more oppressive and more exerted towards these children, right? So we hope coming from the closing, they clarify this particular narrative. But before I go into my constructive, where I'm going to tell you how this narrative necessarily individualizes what are potentially structural problems that bar women from achieving success and bar women from achieving external validation, I want to go over three main questions coming from OG first. One, to what extent is this ideal of independence, whether that be financial or emotional, fair? Second, to what extent is submissiveness is something that is inherently bad? But third of all, to what extent is this idea of emotional independence something that is really feasible in the world and the context that we live in today? On the first question, to what extent is this ideal of independence, whether that be financial or emotional, fair? They completely disregard the idea coming from our OO that self-sufficiency is not an ideal or norm that is equally available and achievable for all daughters and women. Of course, for those daughters that grow up in privileged backgrounds with good university degrees and good job prospects that will find this financial and emotional independence to be readily available goal, because for these women, that narrative is achievable and accessible, right? But what about those daughters that grew up in more racially discriminatory neighborhoods, in poor households, where this ultimate goal of financial independence, fighting against these structures to, achieve independence is less accessible, right? Then we think that this is important because otherwise this becomes another marginalizing and oppressive norm that marginalizes other groups of women who fall into intersectional, identities, right? The premise coming from the government is that financial security is something that is equally and equitably accessible for all women. But we told you that intersectional identities don't necessarily agree with that particular premise coming from the government side, right? So in their world, the narrative is going to look like if you don't achieve financial and emotional independence, then you have failed the ideal narrative. That's the type of oppression and marginalization that we would reject coming from the OO. And the second question, to what extent is this idea of submissiveness or dependence is something necessarily bad? Coming from the government side, their entire premise is that, right? That submissiveness and dependence are inherently bad things. But we question you. What if you are more content, you feel safer being a providing wife, being a faithful wife, being a good mom that doesn't want to exert yourself into corporate cultures, into corporate practices where you have to compete? What if you're someone who finds more self-realization and dignity and pursuit of happiness in that kind of lifestyle, right? So we don't necessarily think that dependence, whether that be financial or emotional, or this negative connotation of submissiveness is something that is inherently bad. And we think this is important because that's the premise of the entire narrative, right? That the inherent wrongfulness or the inherent badness of dependence is what justifies that narrative. So insofar as we're able to prove to you that dependence is not inherently something that is bad, that dependence or solidarity is something that can be good for some lifestyles and some for women, we reject that narrative or reject the premise that backs up that narrative. But let's also briefly talk about this idea of emotional independence because they don't really elaborate on how do people achieve emotional independence. We tell you that self-actualization does not occur in a right? Your perception of self-value, your perception of self-worth are inevitably interlinked with how the society at the end of the day evaluates or sees you, right? So coming from their side, for their narrative to be, emotional independence is something that's easily achievable, we think that's very vacuumistic, right? We think it's an unfair and unrealistic representation of a reality that these daughters will have to face at the end of the day. We live in a very competitive and capitalistic society where external validation will inevitably exist on either side of the house. In that particular given context, how do we better empower or how do we better, allow these women to seek self-actualization? That's going to be the constructive coming from my speech. So with that, I'll integrate the rest of the rebuttals into my actual speech. I'll tell you why this narrative necessarily individualizes what are potentially structural problems that bar women's external validation and success. We think that government side's narrative would be defensible in an ideal world where women were no longer fighting or no longer struggling to equalize the playing field in achieving validation and achieving success, right? Because only then is this independence or this narrative of independence a result of self-win, a result
the metrics of evaluating women, or for example, barring the success of women, whether that be economically, socially, or politically, right? We think that, we have things like such as frowning upon or discriminating based on feminine characteristics in workplace. We have structural barriers that make it more difficult for women to achieve success in the status quo. We have structural wage gaps. We have unfair provision of quality education for women. We have unfair job opportunities, especially in the STEM field and sector or whatnot. We have these practices that actively delegitimize the ability of women to seek validation and to seek success at the end of the day. What is the problem with this? We tell you that what the narrative is that your happiness and self-validation are up to you. That it's your will and your agency of choice to be independent from these metrics, when the actual reason why women cannot self-actualize is due to structural problems and structural barriers that disable them from doing that. We think this is bad because it individualizes what is a structural root, what is a social problem, into an individual optic. What is the impact that we draw to you on our side of the house? We tell you that women, when women are content, or when women are okay with no external validation, when they're okay with no success under the pretext of independence, we think that that's also when you lose out on awareness, when you lose out on the motivation or the enlightenment to be able to challenge the structures, to be able to challenge the narratives, to be able to challenge the traditional power relations and the norms that actively disable you or that actively delegitimize against you, right? We think that that's also when the idea of internalization of oppression becomes something that is much more readily likely on their side of the house, right? Because you're pushing for a narrative where it's okay. You're pushing for a narrative where you're saying that even if you don't get external validation, even if you don't get even if you don't get external validation, or even if you don't achieve success, then that's okay. When that's really not the fault of the women, it's the fault of the social structures that disable women from doing that. But when women are okay with that, when women are content with that, when the reality actively disables women from doing that structurally, because that's also when women stop fighting for greater changes, when women stop fighting against structures. For all these reasons, we're absolutely proud to reject this narrative.
Thank you for your speech. So now I call upon the member of government to open the closing half of the 7-minute kingdom.
Chair, a parent's first and foremost duty is to make their child happy. And we think that when you instill this idea of an independent woman, an ideal that cannot actually even be achieved, you make women extremely conflicted within themselves because on one hand, they have a society that tells them that being independent is good, that idolizes that. On the other hand, you have parents telling you that that's a bad thing and that's not something you should idealize. We think that when you have these conflicting narratives inside of you, you become ashamed of opening up to people. You become ashamed of pursuing the kind of life that you want to perceive. And we thought that that kind of struggling, that kind of emotional struggling was principally completely against what parents needed to provide their children with in the first place, and that is why we completely oppose this motion. So I'm going to talk about two issues in my speech today. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how this narrative is going to create emotional conflict inside of women and why that's harmful. And secondly, I'm going to talk about how these daughters are more likely to be happy in our paradigm. Before that, one individual piece of rebuttal. So opposite government side said women are more likely to work hard and succeed in their paradigm. We see that if you take their very best case, say that women completely internalize these norms and believe that fighting against patriarchy or being a strong independent woman is the good thing, that's actually counterproductive to success, right? Because even if women believe that they shouldn't act docile or shouldn't speak out against or that they need to speak out against patriarchy, that's not what society thinks, right? Society likes submissive women. Society believes that your boss in the future or your job interviewer probably will want you to speak in a very gentle voice, just to have a really soft and warm personality, right? So if these women are acting in this sort of extremely anti-paternalistic ways, they're just going to be rejected as arrogant or bitchy, right? They're not going to get the good jobs. They're not going to be able to climb up the social ladder or get the husband that they want because society won't actually take them in, right? We think rather in our paradigm where women are aware of patriarchy, but they aren't ashamed of working within the system and within the men because they don't feel like they have to fight for patriarchy. We thought they were more likely to succeed when they work within the system. So we thought it was rather counterproductive in their paradigm. So moving on to my first substantive about how this will create emotional conflict, right? So despite what OG and CG says, right, even in Gov paradigm, norms that say that women should be dependent will still exist and be internalized in their paradigm, right? Because parents are not the only people in these girls' lives. They still are going to be exposed to media that glorifies marriage and dependence. They still have friends that idealize marriage and idealize boyfriends. They still have romance films and education that's gender biased, right? They're still going to internalize these values in either paradigm. The difference is that when parents teach children to idealize independence, like you shouldn't get married, or you shouldn't care about boys, or you shouldn't open up and talk about your weaknesses or crying in front of other people, right? What happens is that girls who aspire to things like emotional isolation or independence or rejection of this social norm, right? And we thought that was extremely painful when you have these doubly conflicting wants and ideals, right? And this is where we draw the line, right? OO said some women suffer, especially the vulnerable ones. What we say is that all women suffer when they have these two conflicting narratives within themselves, right? Because even if you want a marriage, you're going to constantly be ashamed. You might turn that person who proposed to you down, right? You might be, even if you're insecure about your body as a teenager, you can't ask for validation because that means that you're not being that independent woman, right? And even if you do ask for validation or receive it, you're going to be ashamed that you actually wanted that validation to begin with, right? When you want to be a housewife and you cannot tell that to your parents, you're going to have to constantly be ashamed of all the choices that you make. When you're always struggling, when you have received severe emotional trauma from things like rape or sexual harassment, you're going to be afraid to open up to the people around you because that means that you're weak, that means that you're not emotionally independent, right? We think that this is extremely harmful. So why is this bad? And Ogo said, some people like independence. Independence is not bad. What as CEO we say is that, I'll take you off my point, is that dependence is necessary for all human beings. It is an extremely good thing, right? People need to talk to people. They need somebody to commit to open up to, right? Life is hard, especially for women, for all the structural reasons that the other teams talked about. You need lovers to love you, friends to listen to you, parents to accept you, and everybody is dependent upon each other, right? And we think that this is especially harmful because independent women does not exist. It is an ideal. It is a facade, right? People like Hillary Clinton or Malala that are seen as independent women, these people are not independent. Hillary Clinton relies on Bill Clinton. Malala relies heavily on her father. These people have emotional dependencies and financial dependencies upon other people. It's simply, independent women is simply a facade that the media picked up on and framed and glorified as independent. It is an unreachable goal to begin with that these people cannot actually realize, right? We think that in that case, these people will never be able to achieve that ideal. They're always going to be struggling for an ideal they cannot reach, something wanting two things at the same time. But if you want that case, if some people want to follow societal norms to be submissive to bosses, that's okay if they're happy. If some people want to be CEOs, that's okay as long as they're not ashamed of talking about the struggles with their friends and actually depending on each other, not like locking it all inside, right? If people want to read books or wear makeup or love boys, that's perfectly fine. Do what you want, right? We think that that is the narrative that rather exists. It's not like believe in the patriarchy, right? And we thought that was extremely important because OG said the parents' biggest duty is to teach the way of life to children. We say that teaching the way of life to children is simply a tool, right? To teach children to survive and feel happy and cope in a society. And that's why we teach them to study, to go to college so they can get money and be happy. We teach them, it's simply a method, right? The ultimate goal is to make them feel happy. And we think that when they don't have conflicting views, when they don't idealize an impossible standard, they're more likely to be happy and satisfied with the life they have. They're more likely to open up and not be ashamed of being themselves or achieving the kind of happiness that they want to achieve. We thought that that kind of happiness was most important for these people. As a parent, for these reasons, happy to oppose.
Thank you for your speech. We'll now go up on the drum and with 7-minute hero.
What we have been extending from clothing garment is about why dependence on the male or any external validation is particularly dangerous, and in concept of independent women best serves the interest of daughters. Why this extension has been so important in this debate? Two reasons why. First of all, because we answered to the burden pushing coming from Sarah. What she said in her deputy speech was that the burden that is imposed on the government bench is not only to tell us working for corporations or those going to university is also a legitimate choice that should be open to women, but we, government side, also have to tell you like why becoming housewives is not the choice that you should actually opt into. This is the very thing that clothing government has been explaining from this side of the house. But the second reason why this extension was important in this debate is because as long as this is an active debate, the central issue should be the interest of daughters as closing question conceded from their side of the house. Like opening government somehow talked about the very wide scale analysis about how reproduction of toxic narrative is problematic, but we on closing government told you why surrendering to that toxic narrative connects to the well-being of daughters, and these are the contributions coming from closing government. Two issues to summarize the affirmative case. First of all, I'd like to examine how we should understand the most fundamental nature of the concept of independence of women for this kind of education, because like somehow like abortion bench like give us so many like exaggerated characterization of this education. We'd like to deny that from this side of the house. Second of all, I'd like to examine which paradigm is more likely to make daughters happier at the end of the day. We to some extent concede that the concept of happiness is the subjective value judgment made by each individual, but we clothing government strongly believes that like, there is some sort of minimum level of ground for happiness, like such as economic economic independence or the autonomous decision making, and we are going to tell you why our paradigm is better capable of providing that. Before that, one independent clarification to the deputy leader of the opposition. Deputy leader of the opposition has told you that this education prevents the structural change, organic change that is happening in the status quo. But we think this is very inconsistent argument coming from that side of the house, considering the entire direction of opening opposition's case. Because what they say on their side of the house is that it's repugnant for society, parent, anyone, to use child as a tool to achieve social change. If it's really so, like the argument coming from that side of the house about the promoting organic change cannot be the reason for their side of the house to oppose the resolution before this country. Having clarified, let's move on to the hard point about the nature of the concept of independence women and this education. So what we have from the entire opposition bench was that like, this is another oppressive narrative because it forces women to be always very active, which oppresses women who want to become housewives, for example, or those who have no like accessibility to good opportunity of job working, for example. There were three problems with opposition's case. The first problem of opposition's case is that they never tell us how they are going to be able to remove the current toxic narratives that girls are already opting into. So the kind of best balance that they magically depict on their side of the house doesn't exist in reality. But the second problem, thank you, of opposition case is that the goal coming from that side of the house, that is to say, the situation in which girls believe in the narrative that it's okay for me to automatically choose my lifestyle is the very thing that we want to achieve on this side of the house. So we think that their harm can be mitigated. It's just a matter of operation on the side of the house. So we do not say that if you become housewives, you are a failure or those sort of things. We are not stupid enough to carry out such level of extreme education, but we just say that it's better for you to become housewives, or it's better for you to opt into the narrative that you can always autonomously choose what you want to opt into. So to that extent, considering the operational inflexibility cannot be the reason for their side of the house to oppose the proposal. No, thank you. So compared to that, what we have been extending from clothing garment was that why, even if there are some girls who cannot realistically overcome structural difficulty, or even if there are some girls who opt into the choice of becoming housewife at the end of the day, why just having the mentality of independence winning is important. So what we tell you from members of the government was that if we tell or talk about the concept of self-sufficiency, daughters, no thank you, can realize that the kind of narrative that is prevailing in the current society is not the only opinion, and the confirmation by patriarchy is not the only confirmation you can get. We can send this kind of message to child on our side of the house. No thank you. So on our side of the house, when daughters face the important value judgment in their lives, they know that patriarchy is not the only option that they can opt into. And this is the benefits that we can achieve on this side of the house. No, thank you. Last one, which paradigm is more likely to make daughters happier? So the contention coming from opposition bench was that accessibility to good opportunity or job is not guaranteed to many girls. But we think on this side of the house that it's somehow unfair for their side of the house to only target the extreme poor people who cannot access to any level of education. We think it's too much narrow down this debate. We are also talking about the usual girls who have reasonable level of access to education. Also, we as parents are very happy to provide any opportunity of education, such as sending child to cram schools, private schools, networking events. But what we have been telling you from this side of the house is that establishing the ground for the economic dependency is essential to the well-being of daughters. So why this extension is important in this space? Because we explain to you why even if the pressurization that they have been worrying about is happening under our side of the house, still it's okay and it leads to the well-being of daughters. So the problem of opposition case is that they miss the comparativeness. They say that this narrative is another oppressive narrative, but even if this narrative is to some extent oppressive, at least this is the comparatively better narrative that girls can opt into, and to that extent we are happy to propose.
Thank you for your speech. So now I call upon the opposition whip to close the debate in 7 minutes. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we think that the concept of independent woman is a facade that represents a facet of multitude of aspects that a successful woman has in a society. We think a specific type of recreation of toxic masculinity makes it harder for women to access and climb up the social ladder in the first instance, but secondly locks people into the notion that dependence is weak. We thought the question in this debate was ultimately one, the premise upon government case was one, that they could make women more successful under their paradigm, but secondly, this really was an ideal form of what they want women to be in the future. And we thought this was two specific questions that Kanan answered in her speech. I want to ask two questions in this speech. First, will this make women better off in terms of success in society? But secondly, is this actually an ideal form of character that women need to subscribe to? But before before that, I need to make clarification in this debate. Because recognize the comparative, right? Because we think under their side of the house, they like to characterize independence as somewhat, as closing government said, not so extreme, it's not going to affect children. Recognize that the phrase of independence has huge implication. Things like financial independence, things like becoming a housewife. Not only that, but think dependence in a more broader sense, seeking for consultation. These are also types of dependence that they're going to demonize under their side of the house. They said that they're not going to push for the extreme. One, if that's the case, then I don't understand the unique benefit coming from their side of the house, precisely because of the society surrounding this individual, constantly telling them to be submissive, to be whatever the society demands them to be, which was the premise of their case. But secondly, notice that the narrative that parents tell children is not going to be interpreted in a way that parents want it to be interpreted. We think when parents constantly tell children to be independent, that is going to be taken as taking a more broader sense, in the sense that when you ask for help, for instance, that's also something you should be ashamed of. When you ask for consultants, for instance, that is also a form of dependence. And I think that particular type of interpretation was problematic. Recognize the comparative, because under our side of the house, we're not going to push for things like become submissive, become a housewife, don't do away with all the opportunities that you might have had. The question is, the difference is, we're going to teach children to question the authority, we're going to teach children to question the gender equality, but the difference is, we're going to tell young girls, no thank you, that dependence is in some instances a very effective strategy for you. It's also a legitimate strategy for you to take. Based on that, let's move on to the question. First question, will this make women better off? The opening government came up and said, when you make more effort based on this narrative, you are likely to get success. And closing government extended this by in a more nuanced way. Opening opposition responded to this by saying that dependence is inevitable in these societies, precisely because individuals' ability to independently challenge the structure is minimal, and therefore structure is unlikely to change. What closing opposition provided to you in this debate was it is a necessity and a requirement for women to be dependent, to be successful in our society. Because, because we think what you need in society in order to become successful is things like consulting with your superiors in workplaces in order for you to get promotion process, in order for you to be able to share the types of ideas you have. We think the fact that all the objective success that we're talking about was actually based on the fact that you're able to consult with other people, you're able to be dependent on other people, and we think that was particularly harmful because we think this particular narrative affects children in multiple ways. No, thank you. We think women are made to confront the quandary every time that they're making decisions. This makes it harder for women to succeed in the societies in the first instance. But secondly, even if they could make the choice, no thank you, to utilize dependence, to utilize the network, they have to constantly blame themselves, which we thought was the harm in this instance. We think a counterfactual was much better in the sense that women did not have to blame themselves for the decisions that they made. No thank you. So basically, closing government said, there's no counterfactual. What is the solution that opposition paradigm has? We think this was something that was already answered to in member's speech from Kanan, because what she told you was things like consultants is something that is only able to be achieved under our side of the house. We think, take like closing government's example, things like DV, things like rape. We think these are some things that can only be solved when you have the ability to be dependent on other people, when you have the ability to consult with other people. Recognize, no thank you, that collective action requires you to collectivize yourself based on dependence, based on what work. We think the only reason why, and the essence of Me Too movement was to share your experiences for the people, being dependent on other people as emotionally, which allowed women to collectivize themselves to challenge the social structure, not independently, but as a group, as a collective entity. We thought that was something that was uniquely necessary, no thank you, in order for women to be able to challenge the structural reasons why they're impeded from success. We think the solution was not independent action. We think the solution was not individual counter mechanism towards the structure that exists in society. We thought collectivization was something that was utterly necessary in this instance. Yes.
Even if more structural and classic patriarchy still exists, if not exacerbated, given that this is an afternoon, why is it in the interest of a parent to further push the oppressive narrative just because for the mere possibility of being successful in society's definition?
No, they're missing a point. Because what we're telling you in the first instance is that dependence is a requirement for you to be successful in the first instance, which is the entire premise of opening government's case. So engage that. No, thank you. The second question, is this actually an ideal character? Recognize the question you need to ask in this debate is independence even a moral good to begin with? Because we question that the ideal that both governments have hold that independent woman is a good woman was something that can be questioned in the first instance. We think the fact that you're framed every time you consult with other people, every time you ask for help to other people, you're framed as a weak woman was something that was never legitimate to begin with. Opening opposition said dependence is not bad. What closing opposition told you was dependence is actually a necessary factor for you to be happy in our society. We think, for instance, the fact that you have this social status or you have the objective form of success didn't mean that you had success in the first instance. We thought things like validation from external validation from peers, for instance, validation from your male counterpart was something that was necessary in order for you to achieve the subjective happiness, which cannot be achieved by things that government side wanted to achieve, things like money, things like capital. We thought a sense of being admitted, sense of being included to the community was a necessary and unique form of fulfillment that individuals could subscribe to uniquely on the closing opposition side of the house. Recognize that success is not a priori good. We think we have better chance of achieving success in the first instance, but we think we're only able to achieve, we're the only side that's able to achieve the sort of subjective fulfillment that all human beings, regardless of gender, needs to have in order for them to live a meaningful life. That's the reason why we say this.